Dunning-Kruger syndrome, or an overestimation of one's ability. Having published an encyclopedic mind, I'd like to go on the opposite direction. So in encyclopedic mind, I talked about we think that we're equally inferior. People has this viewpoint, self-pitying viewpoint, that we're all this average flock of sheep. And in order to counter that, all you have all the spiritual gurus and new age gurus and whatnot, and self-help people, well-intentioned, well-intended, positive psychology people. That's why you have the spate of the self-help industries big in order to precisely to counter the notion that we're not equally inferior. So I argued how the society has this mentality. For the most part, we're this average sheep who go trundles along in buses and public transit and just goes on with the motion of life. That's why I was cynical and bitter about this notion that we're not probably equally inferior, and we have encyclopedic mind, but it's just in a different way. It's a more natural way, a more fragmented way. Even a stuttering, bumbling buffoon may have a lot of secret talents, kinesthetic talents probably. Who knows? Probably he could be like stumbling awkwardly, like a like a what do you call it? Klutz. This clumsy person who stumbles and fumbles over everything, but he could be, when it comes to juggling or say some other ability, where by repetition and myeliniation, that's what good effective speakers are, the practice. But I'm not gonna be self-conscious about that right now. So I'm gonna talk about Dunning-Kruger syndrome. I don't know anything about Dunning-Kruger syndrome, the details of it. I just hear about it a lot, and I don't know who Dunning and Kruger were, but I question their bias. Cause okay, so if imagine this story, we're in land of dinosaurs, or we're Neanderthals or whatnot. We're in the caveman era. Did men never lived alongside with the only large creatures that lived alongside was woolly mammoth and probably giant whale. That's a good question. What is the largest creature that ever lived with mankind on Earth? Not dinosaurs, obviously. Not pterodactyl and like freaking Brontosaurus, Ichthyosaurus, and Allosaurus, and Iguanodon, and Stegosaurus, Triceratops. So, Diplodocus. Um, okay, Ankylosaurus. So what was I saying? So imagine there was this really smart guy in the caveman area, like, and he came up with this theory, the Dunning-Kruger syndrome, and then he pompously, pretentiously went around saying, "Oh, we overestimate how futile is in vain and is the human how futile is mankind's venture in vain, blah blah blah." And he pretentiously struts about in their area with in the porticos and zistas that are reminiscent of Oxford and whatnot, and he potentially preaches this around like Socrates, I guess, but except he's not a full-blown Socrates, and he has this theory based on some two mythical guy, Dunning and Kruger. What good would it have done to us? Imagine it seeps into people's consciousness and people become so bitter and cynical, and they stopped flight and other inventions like fire or wheel or whatever, some major inventions. It serves no good. I would rather be overestimate my ability than underestimate it. So I mean, I question their bias. Dunning and Kruger. Probably they sucked at exercises, or like they were like really sucked at athleticism, and I'm just guessing here. And that's why they said, "Oh, you know what?" But and that's why they became, "Oh, we'll always suck at sports." So and they went about their the intellectual pursuit. That's how people justify we're bad at math, or like we're bad at sport, and like there is no growth syndrome of Amy Cuddy. That's her name. Uh, so yeah, I wonder what their bias was. Because everyone has a bias. Michael Sharma, be it, or Richard Dawkins, or any atheist, or Amazing Randy, or whoever. See, I question I'm skeptical of the skeptics because I honestly think the pseudo skeptics. Because whenever I do something, I try to trend to go to the extreme. But I can appreciate why they would come up with that notion because we throw that around genius so loosely nowadays. Like everyone is a genius or something. You do this, and we praise mediocrity and uh, an average tendency, and like everyone is an expert on something in the comment section, right? So like law or whatnot. But there is an utterly cynical view of it because you can never really be an expert on it, and no matter what you do, you can easily knock someone down by saying, "But you don't know everything about that." You can be an expert on Dunning-Kruger, and I can still question you. I can still Google some obscure question and drill it, drill you and riddle you so that you're leaving you with shaky and without any confidence or anything, and doubting you yourself, and so that you doubt yourself every step of the for the rest of your life. Or for that matter, suppose you're an expert on platypus, you know, I can always find some question and attend random obscure question and just grill them, and if they can't answer them, then just say, oh, someone thinks he's an expert. I think it's more of a because we don't know the context matters. Ceteris paribus. If the situation were the same, that's what the assumption is. But probably situations are not the same because technically, I think we our mind is like a has infinite possibilities as a probability space, literal probability space where anything exists, any potential, and the infinite potential exists. So I guess what would be example of Dunning-Kruger? Like if I say, oh, okay, I can memorize this book in an hour, and obviously that's an example, but maybe I could when I was young. I had that ability, and I hark back to that. But by only saying, oh, you think you can do it, imagine perfect example would be Bannister. If there were all this batch of nerdy guys in shorts with bangs, and I'm just stereotyping the fuck out of it because imagine the people who you really hate all these nerdy guys. Imagine there are a string of them and they're just in nasal twang. I'm just the Conan's impression, the typical nerd. Imagine there were like hundreds of them, and then they jeered on Roger Bannister as he was trying to do his thing every day in athletic track. What good would it have done? They say that he overestimated. Actually, I don't know anything about Dunning-Kruger, but I think it's a more, and that's what academia nowadays has become very skeptical and like over lopsided actually. Before there was this more harmony, holistic harmony between skepticism and intuition and faith. Now it's all just like the question, is science falsifiable? Yeah. No one questions that. You go to a logic class in college or critical thinking class, and this by no means an attack or a diss on the professor. It's not the fault of the professor but the system, and because they themselves went through the brainwashed system, and they think. See, you go to an English critical thinking literature class or logic class, and they'll talk about argument from authority, right? Apparently, it's a fallacy. But that's exactly what they're preaching. They're from a point of authority. And then there was this guy, and then he said, and then the professor said, "Oh, but what if it was from Harvard?" Harvard, and the guy, and there was this pretentious snob in a freaking pants and a shirt, all dressed up in class, and he said, "I'm sure he's a nice guy. I'm just knocking him for no reason." And he said, "Oh, maybe, but it's an accepted form of authority." I mean, that's the insidious toxicity of our education system. It's like we have this pompous guy on pulpit preaching something, and then we have the perfect student parroting back, and as if being preached from the gospel, and in a cappella tone of choir, chorusing along the things that he wants to hear in his echo chamber. Everything is an echo chamber. Any system, if you talk about Norbert Wiener, cybernetics, any closed system, but that has a feedback loop, has flaws, has blind spots. Sort of like I'm talking about Gödel's version or Turing's version of in reality everything. Like you can never be a master of anything. Cards, poker player. Suppose you have photographic memory, and you could memorize all the order of deck of shuffle cards. You're good at blackjack. You're good at poker. But if someone were to view that from a detached point of view, like a God's consciousness, looking at ant, he could always find a blind spot of his field of expertise. So in this case, a card player, card shark. So I don't know what I'm talking about. Basically, yeah. So Gödel's incompleteness theorem, or like the unknowingness, relative unknowingness. There's actually a field in maths or like in information theory called uncertainty theory. Like it's devoted completely. I'm sure that's an exciting field of research, and I will never go back to college. But if for aspiring students out there and anyone listening who's on into academia and formal education, I think that would be a fantastic niche. But then even if just like Clifford Pickover said, was it he who said that? Like we're knowing more and more about everything. Pretty soon we'll know everything about nothing, right? That's the danger of specialization. So, I mean, if your focus is on uncertainty theory, there'll always be some things you don't know about that theory, that field itself, the uncertainty theory. So by de facto logic, by virtue of that logic, obviously you cannot know anything about it. So that's like a complete failure. You're doomed to fail to start with from the beginning, from the trot. So it's not even a why even bother? Why even bother study uncertainty theory if you know that you'll not know about everything? I think in every field, what would is the uncertainty principle in law? Quis ipsis custodius ipsis custos. I don't know. Who guards the guardsman? Quis ipsos custodius custodiet. I think that's how it goes. I actually took Latin, but that was a long time ago in high school in Pretoria Boys High. The classic, wooden bench grammar school type of Latin classes. Boring declensions, and I forgot most of it, but the foundation stayed. So, the foundation stayed. So yeah, as I was saying, in law, what would be the blind hole, a blind spot, and a loophole, a plot hole in law, in that law, in that system, in legal system, in legislative that structure, that you cannot, the reasonable doubt, right? There always will be some form of reasonable doubt, no matter what the crime. I think that's where the expertise of a lawyer or a defense attorney comes in. Is like, just like Alan Shore, James Spader. That that bastard could fucking defend anyone. You could pretty much blow someone's head off in middle of Times Square, and he'd be like, he'd use some compassion, Buddhist bullshit logic to fucking bail you out. That's where the genius lies, real genius, where you can pretty much you play devil's advocate literally, and you can defend anyone. And there's always some room of error for it, error of parallax of reality rather. So I guess by if you go think on that line, there is you will justify Dunning-Kruger syndrome. because you can never know if once in our philosophy class, Professor Holland, he was a nice guy. He said he talked about spheres. The more, and there's this sphere encoded in and like embedded in a sphere, encircled in another sphere, and this is our knowledge. And the more we know, the more we don't know, and the knowledge, and the circle grows even exponentially bigger. So yeah. So I guess my question would be, by virtue of that logic, the people who came up with Dunning-Kruger syndrome, even though without knowing anything about Dunning and Kruger, maybe that itself is an example of Dunning-Kruger syndrome, right? The idea of overestimation of one's ability is itself an overestimation of one's ability, or rather an inability. But then that's an ability. Suppose you're a psychologist major and you do a dissertation on Dunning-Kruger syndrome, and that's your expertise, that's your PhD, that's your thesis. But maybe that itself leaves open to this whole can of worms filled void where you don't know anything. Basically, you know nothing. Bullshit. Have you ever walked into math section of your college library, university library, basic university rather, because the library in community college is way different than the ones in university. And if you were to ever trek to a university library, especially the math area, you'll see volumes upon volumes upon volumes, inscrutable, obscure, obscure, this symbolic, this gibberish, basically pages and pages. We're chopping down trees, and I got no qualms about it, because I really don't care if the world is going to hell in a handbasket, because I mean, yeah, it balances out. Why mess with ecosystem? But at the same time, maybe, who knows? We need knowledge, I guess. So yeah, but the point being, there were these pages and pages, volumes, trillions of pages, not trillions, but at least so many pages filled with all this stupid, basically information that means ultimately nothing. Alan Watts would talk about this guy, this a monk once said, basically from bathtub to casket, it's all gibberish. And like a bird's cawing, caw 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 caw. That's what we are ultimately doing. But you cannot also not do that, because what would be the alternate? Let's be quiet. I guess you can never. You can. People talk about calming the mental chatter, but and that's another thing. I was thinking last night how we conflate peace with quietness and silence. Like, you can be depressed and be a quiet, silent person. So not necessarily something that is silent and quiet is peaceful. You can be a depressed person and your mind could be in turmoil, and that's not peace. That's why, on the other hand, you could be in the middle of a tornado. I mean, I'm talking about, not by, when I say by middle of tornado, I don't mean the eye. I'm talking about the essence. Suppose tornado was a being, or like a feeling, like an energy. So inside that energy, you can still find, if you were to miraculously, if a storm were to be anthropomized, like the whole thing, like, not animist way, you can get inside. What I mean by, like, yeah, last time I ended by saying that the ugliness itself is pure form of God and God consciousness, Christ consciousness. So what I mean by those is like the essence of it, the act of the matter, the um, the suchness, I guess, tattagata, the essence. If you were to be the essence of turmoil, in the essence of turmoil there is peace, and in the essence of quietness there can be turmoil. Peace is not necessarily quietness, and quietness is not necessarily peace, neither calmness. I mean, maybe you can be this bumbling buffoon, chirping, stuttering, stumbling buffoon who's dancing around, like waving his hands around like that embarrassing meme the haters will hate. And that itself could be ultimately God in disguise, million masks of God. T.S. Eliot? Was it T.S. Eliot? No, I don't think some other guy. Yeah, T.S. Eliot wrote Wasteland. And the fourth, was it the quartet? I forget. Yeah, I'm not a big poetry guy. So Dunning-Kruger syndrome, an uncertainty principle, an unknowingness, unknown theory, an uncertainty theory. I think that's a fantastic area to like really, as I was saying, to delve in the unknowingness. Like, um, think of maths, like prime numbers. You can always conceive a prime number so large. If you were to make it like a cell, like like a cell, like a Turing, those cells of a Turing machine, which is like, suppose it's 1 inch, 1 inch square, like, or like more small, like pixels, like a micrometer. No matter what, if you were to write a large number, like really conceive of a large number, you can wrap that, because the prime numbers can be, I wonder, that's a good question. Just because the prime numbers are uh, uncountable, like there are always infinitely many prime numbers, does it mean the length can also be an I mean, can the length of a string of prime number like be uncountable? That's a good question. That's a good stack exchange question. Yeah, I'm sure there's some fight over it, like freaking people getting angry at their question being closed down because it's just. Oh, anyways. So, anyways, the point being, so yeah, algorithmic information theory, Gregory Chetan, omega conscious, omega theory, and all those bullshit. The omega constant, Chetan's constant, the omega symbol. Like, you can always think of, you can always conceive a number so infinitely large that encodes and encapsulates captures all of consciousness and God's theory and thought and information. That itself could be like so mind-bogglingly, then like mind-blowingly, like complex, that we can't even wrap our head around it. We can fathom it. I wonder what Chetan's constant is all about. But anyways, so suppose you you randomly are typing for not infinite time, for the end of the universe, as the Laplacian monkeys would go, like 2, 3, 4, 5, blah blah blah. And suppose you could do that for a really, really long time. But that's another question. That's another Hofstadterian question. Like when I say write a long number by really long for a really long time, does that even make sense? Is grammatically accurate? Even though I'm like fumbling my words, it's grammatically accurate, right? But it has no meaning. What do you mean by write a large number so large that'll take a long time? Because what is the because a large number that takes a long time, what is the relativeness to it? Imagine two Turing machine and like a string, like basically linear, one dimensional, like a ladder with like cells. So you have to compare that set with another like with another set, and it's just meaningless. But where do you compare it from? That's a problem with, I think, with our maths and logic, and that's why I never pursued those area, and I gave up after like crashing through all the Wikipedia and Russian encyclopedia entries. But I suck at calculation. I know nothing about calculation. I know nothing of machinery or of abstract algebra. And obviously, I don't. I don't have any degree or anything. But the point being, mathematics, like, it's like, just like you can always trick someone in mathematics, no matter what. Um, Suppose your expertise in abelian group theory or whatever, like abstract algebra, group theory, and those areas, right? And those have practical implication, but the way, how can I put it? Suppose you read a zillion. Okay, not a zillion. I don't know if we even know how long a zillion is. Or is zillion even the right number? Or that's like a fictional number? Quintillion books. Suppose you author quintillion books on group theory, right? You the quintillion, like a school's number way. You do that exponentially. There are that many books on that topic that could still be written or unknown, which you don't know anything about. It's like no matter how large a number is, imagine a blank screen and you take two fingers and you expand it, not expand it, you just scale it. So imagine you take your thumb and index finger, right? And as much as you can extend it, small or big, you put that on a blank screen. And imagine that itself is like a really large number. That anything that's like a Brahma, like a Kalpa, like a Eon, like really large number. If it's a blank screen, like a blank canvas of the size of a roof of your own room, right? Imagine how much you can, like if you take your the span of your thumb and index finger and expand it, you can do that and you can make that like a really large number, and you can just pretty much go forever repeating that. You know what I mean? Like we cannot even fathom mathematically how large things can get. And so that itself is a championing of Dunning-Kruger syndrome, actually. Is no matter how much we know, there will be exponentially squeeze numbery way of things we don't know. And at the same time, we will know, we do know a lot. So then now I'm harking back to my encyclopedic mind episode. I think I'll end on that note right now. So yeah, School's number, uncertainty theory, Greg Richardson, randomness, algorithmic information theory, dice, does God play dice, chaos theory, perturbation theory. Um, yeah, Mandelbrot set. But I think that's a nice area to research uncertainty theory. Like, because we all read Gödelization, right? Forcing, Paul Cohen forcing. Actually, we didn't. That's why I talked about, I said, I only have a holistic intuitive idea of mathematical philosophy and maths in general because I just absorbed the gist of it of all this article, but I haven't gone to the depth of it. And the only reason I'm going to depth of it is because no matter, it's like you cannot drill an empty hole. It's like you're catching air. So what's the point? It's some kind of like an anti education in sense. Like that's why they say the more the Tao in intellectual people, and I'll paraphrase Lao Tzu, and intellectual people, the average people, the random, like the whole, that's why it doesn't affect me as much, the COVID thing. Because average, most people, what they go about doing is like they grow and they whether it be finding themselves, being better. And Taoists would say, you know what, I'm gonna be a bumbling simpleton. More people are growing, I'm gonna shrink, I'm gonna shrivel, I'm gonna ungrow. That's the difference between a Taoist and an intelligent, superior, sharp-witted tongue person.